All right, thank you everybody for hanging in there and waiting and for dealing with the echo. You do have the surveys in front of you. Those are 100% anonymous, so we don't ask for your name. The reason you have those surveys, I should say, are to provide us with some better insight about what's happening within your community. We'll never put it out there to say this is what we got from these individual people. We never put out the email list to anybody. That stays internally. And I'll tell you why we collect the emails is, for this, we're going to come back. And what we're looking for at some stage are community leaders. And we're looking for people within the community where you live that understand the framework and the vision, which we're going to present to you today. And more importantly, those that see their role into it. All right, so Gun and Gang Task Force, this is the Gang Prevention Task Force. Anybody heard of this before? You did, sir, you did. And we usually kept it under wraps. We kept it under wraps. This has been in existence for 3 years. And the reason we kept it under wraps is we had to kind of figure out what we're doing. All right, initially what happened is one of our deputy chiefs, who's a really high up senior officer in the police service, came down to Guns and Gangs. And he said every year for the last 15 years we've gone out and we've done major projects and we've arrested potentially some of the worst people, being potential killers, potential human traffickers, potential drug dealers, but we're not catching up to how quick they're evolving. And the evidence to that is every year we arrest hundreds of potential gang members, we seize hundreds of guns, we seize millions of dollars worth of drugs and money, and every year the problem continues to grow. So the natural progressive step was 3 years ago, myself and Detective Kondo were tasked with solving this one problem with one sentence, and that sentence was, we need to figure out a way to get gang members out of gangs. That became the natural progressive step. So, sounds easy, sounds doable, sounds like the right thing to do, but over the course of 3 years, and after dealing with 70 gang members who wanted to get out of a gang, we had zero success with the exception of one person. And in the process of figuring out how do we actually do this, we talked to police agencies and law enforcement agencies all over Canada, the United States, South America, United Kingdom, and what we found is nowhere in the world does anybody have an effective way or an evaluated way, being that they've had a third body look at this to say, does this work, to get a gang member out of a gang. The benefit to that was we learned a tremendous amount of what happens for somebody from the age of 0 all the way to 18 and up for them to become a gang member. And today we're going to present that to you, as well as present the overall vision of how to actually solve this problem. And to solve this problem, some people want a single solution. They want a single program. So for years, the first 2 years, every month we get a phone call from some high-ranking police officer or some politician or somebody who said, have you developed the program yet? And every month the answer was no. And then as years went on, we realized there is no program. Now the benefit of that is there might not be a single solution, but there are hundreds of solutions that need to work together at the same time to attack a problem like this. And really, when we're talking about attacking and combating gangs, we're not talking about gang members, we're talking about gang violence. Okay, so gang violence is separate than gang members. Gang violence is the worst of the worst, the ones that tremendously impact families and loved ones and people. And gang members are those kids that ultimately get recruited in, get conditioned in, that sometimes are lost, sometimes are looking for direction, and whoever has guided them in is not looking at their best interest. And 50% of the gang members that we know of in the city of Toronto, approximately, are under the age of 18. This is not a war on kids, this is a war on violence. That being said, we have to look at the pocket of kids, and how do we stop that from happening in the first place from the age of 0 all the way up to 18 plus. So I'll ask you here in your own opinions, and I don't know where everybody's from. There's a lot of familiar faces, a lot of old faces, a lot of new faces. But I'll ask you here, what is the purpose of a gang in your experience? So the purpose of a gang, if I were to ask you this, right? Yes, sir.
Provides family support.
So he said provides family support. Everybody agree with that? Everybody can kind of understand that? Yeah? So family support, what else? Money? And explain money to me. So trafficking in drugs, so like human trafficking, like prostitution, right? So to acquire money.
Yeah, I was going to say money making.
Money? Yes, ma'am. To belong. To belong. All right, and the reason I ask this is even for us as experienced police officers who have been in the space of guns and gangs for a multitude of years and who've interviewed and had contacts with thousands of gang members combined, we had to take a look at a couple things. One of them was if we're going to aggressively go after gangs, we really needed to know what a gang is. And I'm talking on a global scale. I'm not talking the law enforcement lens. And here's the problem with the research is the number one problem with gang research is gangs don't have a formal definition that's agreed upon universally. And there's a reason for that. How gangs impact the police is one way. Now, if there's any teachers in the school, in the room, or anybody in the educational facility, so how do gangs impact the school? Yeah. So you're in a specific pocket, right, being education. But when you have a gang member outside of school, let's forget that. Let's talk about in the school atmosphere. What is it like trying to teach a potential gang member? Are they disruptive in the school environment? Right, they are. Yes. Suspensions every day, disruptive. As an educator, is it extremely difficult to educate and manage? Right, and it makes your job extremely difficult. Do you oftentimes feel unsafe? See, so there's a different impact to schools with gang members than there are to police. And then gang members are also living in a lot of the cases that we're seeing, not all the cases, but in community housing. And they affect community housing residents very differently. And when you look at what happens when a gang member either shoots somebody or becomes a victim of a crime and they go to a hospital, it impacts hospitals very differently. And when we did a collective picture to say what happens with somebody from 0 to 18 that becomes a gang member, and we looked at, this is a massive issue surrounding not only the definition but the impact points, we have to kind of isolate on what we're looking for in terms of what we're going to target. So all across the world, the commonalities in gang members on not only the law enforcement end, but really the big impacts on communities are these three things. Okay, gang members and gangs in general do these three things all over the world. These are the core. All right, they deal drugs, they control territory, and they collect debt. But that's not the only thing that gang members do. What else do they do? Let's talk about just crimes that you see on TV. What do they do outside of this? Yes, sir.
I feel like the point of the family and her enjoying it, is that in one of those areas? I feel like that's maybe the primary reason for getting belonging.
So this gentleman mentioned, when he's talking about the belonging and all that stuff, right? Those are reasons.
Okay.
So purpose and reasons are two different things. All right, and sometimes we put reasons with purpose. But the reason somebody might find themselves attracted to this might be influence, might be a sense of belonging, might be I need a mentorship, might be all that stuff. But the purpose of the group that they've been attracted to or recruited into is this. And the reason we separate purpose and reasons is there a basketball court in this community? There is, right? And if we were to go there and find a bunch of kids that wanted to belong, that needed some positive role models, that might have had some behavioral issues, and they're all collectively together, are they a gang? No, they're a bunch of kids. So the reasons might be there, but if they're together and this is part of that equation, now we're looking at something different. So the reason we bring this up and we separate the two is because we did not want to rope up those kids that are not doing this and say you're a gang member. We wanted to be very clear in who we're looking for and the activities we're looking for. All right, but gangs on top of this, they do many other things. What's in the newspaper almost every day right now? Shootings. Right, so gangs do shootings, unfortunately. What's the worst thing that happens when somebody gets shot? You die. And we would call that murder. But gangs also do many things. They do human trafficking. They deal in crazy drugs. They recruit young children. They intimidate people. They terrorize communities. They terrorize environments. They impact schools. They do a ton of different things. But at the core of all the gangs all over the world are these three things. So all of those other activities supplement something in here. But we have to look at what is the purpose outside of the reasons. And the reasons are there. And we're going to get to the reasons because those reasons, the beauty of the reasons and the beauty of knowing what the exact reasons are is it helps us identify what we're looking at. And if we can't identify what we're looking at, we can't wait until it gets too late. So the idea is to catch this as quick as possible. And the second thing we had to look at was who joins gangs. So let's talk about the purpose, like you said, right? And this is more in purpose areas. So who joins a gang? If you were to describe to me a kid who joins a gang. Right? I'm not talking physically. Yes, ma'am. I like what you said. You said they get what they want, not what they need. So what would we define as what they need collectively? Let's just bring this back to basic human beings. Okay, so what would you say? So look, you said engaged parents, good role models, food, shelter. Yes, sir.
But how do you explain that when there's kids or teenagers or even young adults that have all that and they're still together?
They're rarities, and they are exceptions to the rule. And the exceptions to the rule are distractions, because the exceptions are a very small percentage. And if the small percentage gets all the attention right now, we lose out on the bigger population, which is the most impoverished. The other part to that is there's commonalities. All right, and the crazy commonalities is this: we've gone to higher income neighborhoods in Ontario, and we've said, hey, you cannot be blind to this problem. I'll give you an example. In British Columbia, we were out there 3 years ago to look at what's happening in their gangs. Their gangs are extremely violent. To give you an example, in 2016, we had approximately 480 total shootings in the city of Toronto. That same year, British Columbia had 640 gang shootings alone. It is wild. Now here's the difference between us in Toronto and what's happening in Vancouver and places like Surrey, BC. What happens over there is their gang members come from middle to high income homes where families have businesses. And our gang members come from low equitable neighborhoods and families that are struggling in Toronto to make ends meet. Now what's the commonality between a kid who has parents that own a business that are really well-to-do, and another kid whose parents don't have money? There might not be parents, there might be a parent. What's the commonality there?
Lack of direction is mentioned.
Lack of direction. So there's this assumption that because somebody makes a lot of money, that they are engaged, that they're involved, and they provide direction. And what they're finding in British Columbia and other areas outside of Toronto is those same parents have an absolute lack of involvement in their kids' life. They have the money and they're busy with their business, so what they do is they just give them what they want, not what they need. So we do have commonalities, and the commonalities have to do with getting away out of the mindset that people who aren't of high value in terms of income don't have these problems. It's just way more represented in low income for a multitude of reasons, right? And those multitude of reasons, I'll give you the answer. When you guys came in, you were given a laminated card, right? Those are called gang risk factors. So for us, we had to look objectively, okay, what are gangs, what do they do? Deal drugs, collect money, collect debt, control territory. And then we had to look at, well, what happens? How does somebody become a gang member? And part of our research, when we looked all across the world, in 2007, Public Safety Canada published what you have in front of you. They're called gang risk factors. And what they looked at is they looked at millions of gang members all over the world, and they found the commonalities. And the commonalities are 36 individual things that happen to a kid from zero all the way to adulthood, that if none of these get mitigated, which means they get addressed with a different balanced area. So if they have all these bad things and there's nothing positive to balance that out, they have a higher or increased chance of becoming a gang member. And if you look at those risk factors, none of them have to do with your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your religion, your belief system. That stuff does not matter. It does not matter. The only time it matters in terms of your religion, your ethnicity, your belief system is when we have to intervene and we have to prevent this from happening. And the reason why that matters is, for example, if somebody is of the Islamic faith or Catholic faith, the approach might have to be different based on their existing belief system. You can't just force something into something if it's contrary to what they believe in. But everything before that, that does not matter. What does matter are these risk factors. And the more of these that happen the more of these that happen that don't ever get addressed, the more likely are this problem happens. Now, these risk factors, we'll get into the story as to where they come from and how they show up. And I'm going to give you the most recognizable ones to look out for. And if you take a look at it, look at those risk factors there. The more of those you look at, look at anybody who has those. And I want you to ask yourself, let's subtract the word gang from this whole thing. Just take that word out of your head, all right? And just look at a normal human being who would have suffered from all of that in their life up until the age of 18. And you tell me what the likelihood of success is for that person. What is the actual expectation? if somebody is going through all of these and none of them ever get addressed. It's not going to happen. They don't have the resiliency to bounce back or the insight to be able to do it. Not a single one.
That's the lie. We are.
Okay, I want you to, exactly what you said. And you said all of it is lies. Now think about the story you just told me. Is that healthy? Would you wish that on somebody else?
No, never.
No.
Never.
Exactly my point. So the fact that you overachieved, you should be very proud of that. I never said everybody, I said the likelihood. So you got to be focused on your experiences, and this is very important for the room to say that your individual experiences might lie to you and they might not be the absolute truth. So your story there, you said it's all lies. Now, would you wish that on anybody?
Never.
Never. Why would you not? You're 16 years old, all right? At 16, did you feel connected to anybody?
No.
Nobody.
No.
Imagine, where was the safest place for you to be at 16? So let's say you're outside at the creek by yourself, and there was a positive adult community member at the age of 16 and walked up to you and said, listen, you know what? I know you're going through a rough time, but you're going to go to university. You're going to do extremely well there. You're going to get certified in some stuff you really care about, and your life's going to be amazing. Well, now you tell me what that would have done for you, because right now you're super emotional.
It would have made all the difference.
What did I just do? How much did that cost me? What would have that meant to you at the age of 16?
Everything.
That cost me 20 seconds of my time. All right, so when you talk about this being lies, you're wrong. I hate to tell you this. Because if there was somebody like me who understood what I understood now and I saw you sitting at that creek, I promise you would have had a different life. Because I would have planted that seed in front of you. I would have planted it in front of you so that you didn't have to find that seed later on in your life. Agree or disagree? It's just human beings. It's human beings. So when we look at all these mitigating risk factors and you had to figure out a way to do this, and amazing, you did it. And that's something you should be very proud of and you should hold in high regard because you did it. And that's an achievement you should be very proud of. But as human beings, 10 seconds of my day to mitigate in one sentence, probably 5 of those things because we planted some hope and some connection. All right, and I just have to nourish that. I don't have to be with you 24/7, maybe once a month. How's it going? Do you even know how to apply to university? Do you know what you need? Those small things that we all take for granted being knowledge that doesn't get shared. This is very much a sharing exercise. But with this, when we talk about people who join gangs, in a weird way, you're lucky. But in the thousands of gang members in the city of Toronto, a lot of them are not lucky. In fact, they're victims of their own brain, they're victims of being manipulated, they're victims of being sucked in by terrible things. You're probably asking why we ended up in your neighborhood and why we're doing this, and this is number 25 or 26 of 31 town halls that we're hosting. And I'll give you the answer as to why we're in your neighborhood in particular. For 2 years, we tried to merge together with government agencies, government groups, local agencies, not-for-profits, but the biggest obstacle we had was organizational legal. And we said to them, look, man, we want to work together to solve this problem. Everybody wanted to know, what does this cost me? What do I get out of it? And unfortunately, elections held us back, provincial elections, city elections, federal elections. And after all that, we sat back, we had a good conversation, we thought about it, and we said, man, you know what we've never done? We've never engaged the communities that need it the most. Because we had learned a bunch about what happens on the government end, on the programming end, but we didn't have a good contact with the community to say, what's happening? So I'll give you an example, and I'll explain to you why we're here. Has anybody seen this before? What is it for those of you? I know we have CDO. Do you want to explain this to everybody? So these neighborhoods, right? 31 low equity neighborhoods. The city was broken down 140 different neighborhoods around 2015. And some of the scoring system was based off of a few things. Some of it had to do with what does the household look like? What is the average median income of the household? What is their access to economic opportunity? What is the access to transportation? A whole bunch of things, and 31 neighborhoods were deemed low equity neighborhoods. The good news is, as of 2020, there is tons of resources and investments into your communities to bring them back up to healthy levels. When we saw this, we did a comparison. And what we did is we wanted to see, where are the active gangs? Where is the gang violence? Where are the shootings happening? And if I were to take that map and this map and we lay them on top of each other, they're almost identical. That's not a chance. That's not coincidence. One of the risk factors we have is social disorganization, which is the theory from the 1940s, which just says that sometimes your environment is more important than the actual person when it comes down to promoting negative behavior or criminal behavior. And if you look at it, there is a hard tie-in to low equity and gang membership, right? And we got to take the word gang out of it, and you think about it, it's people who want things that they don't have no idea how to get. So they join groups that say, I know how to get this. They find blueprints, and these blueprints are not healthy for them. And that's how we ended up in these neighborhoods. We said, look, we know what a gang is. They control territories, they collect debt, and they deal drugs. We kind of know who joins gangs from these risk factors, so we know what to look out for outside of what people might think gang members look like. And third, we know where to go. So we developed this aggressive outreach strategy with this as part of it, and part of this is a real recruitment session for us to find local community leaders, because the reality is you might not trust the Toronto police, and we're okay with that. You might like myself, you might like Dale, but you might say, I like Ron and Dale, but I don't like the Toronto police. And we're okay with that. What I mean by that is, has anybody here ever called the police because they had extra ice cream at home? No. Most people haven't, right? Usually their experiences with the police are, I've been pulled over, there was a murder, my house got broken into, so there's a negative connotation with it. We're not here to break that. What we are here to do is find community leaders like yourself that have contacts and influence and impact in your own neighborhoods, and let us build you up. Let us share what we know, let us share our resources, and let's find what actually works. I'll give you a prime example. We had one town hall where there was a gentleman, and he wanted to know how to reduce the cost of rental space, or sorry, the rental fee for gyms. We said, why do you want to reduce it? And what he was doing on his own was he had, over the course of 5 years, paid for gym space every week, mentored 150 kids, 70 of them graduated university on his own. Now that's the type of guy that we want to invest in and to grow and mimic. So not only do we want to build him up and teach him the proper skills and designations to how to do this effectively, even better, but we also want him to teach other people in the neighborhood to be able to do exactly what he did because he had such success with it. Now imagine if we got 1,000 kids. That's not us. We can't solve that problem. If you look at these social risk factors, with the exception of community, the police are not the answer here. I promise you that. We will never be able to solve this problem on our own. We absolutely need to address these as early as possible and most effectively as possible. I'll give you a story and I'll highlight these risk factors as quick as I can. I want you to imagine a 3-year-old kid who's at home, and in the family risk factor category, those occur between the ages 0 to 6. That's when they're the most evident. So 0 to 6, the family risk factors happen. And this 3-year-old is that 3-year-old who's completely uncontrollable. I mean, like absolutely uncontrollable. Or and then that 3-year-old moves on at grade 6. In grade 6, he gets into the school atmosphere, and we have the school risk factors. And at grade 6, in the age of 6 in grade 1, he's failing school. So that 3-year-old, he's uncontrollable at home. He goes to school in grade 1, he's failing school. And all of a sudden he moves on, he develops a peer group at age 9. So you're looking at between 9 and 15, he starts to develop this peer group. And those peer group is exactly like him. And then from the peer group, he moves on to the age of 15 in the community risk factor category, or individual risk factor category. And the biggest indicator there is he self-identifies as a gang member. So anybody here who's dealt with a 15-year-old gang member? If you ask them, are you a gang member? What do they say? No. Some say no. I can tell you in law enforcement, and they tell us. Yes, they do. They tell us. For the gun and gang probation and parole, do they tell you? Some. But the biggest one is if you look at their social media accounts, it's blasted all over there. It's blasted all over there. Yeah, I am a gang member. It's all listed there. And then ultimately that kid hits the age of 18 and the community risk factors happen, which is where the police come into play. You're talking about serious community violence. And we talked about it. Right? What happens in the news every day? There's shootings. And I'll tell you a quick story about one of the many kids that we have worked with. I'll give you two in comparison very quickly, where these risk factors were evident in every aspect of their life, and they were never mitigated. Meaning that nobody put a hand on their shoulder and said, look, man, you can do more than this, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to share with you in a way that you value and you can understand. Right? And we all value things a little differently. So we had one gang member who was exactly what you'd expect him to be, unfortunately. Right? He was a one of 5 kids. He was in a single-parent home. We lived in community housing. At the age of 3, he was uncontrollable. Mom had a hard time with this kid. All right? But every time he was naughty, Mom would give him attention, so he's already connecting. And when I do this type of behavior, I get this. Then he moves on and he becomes a 6-year-old in school, and who's the replacement for Mom in school? The teachers, right? And he continues this behavior, and what happens in grade 1, I don't know if you've taught grade 1, but you have a really disruptive kid. What happens? Listen, and there's biology that connects all that. That says behavior gets rewarded, you start to fire and wire a different way. Yes, ma'am. Well, listen, do you want the police officer to arrest the 6-year-old? So, hold on. So here's the thing. What you're talking about, exception to the rule. They are not, I will promise you, they are not thousands of kids that are suffering from what you spoke about. That is not a commonality. That is an exception to the rule. So that's an assumption. That's not the first thing they teach them. So do you think that's the right thing to do? Do you believe that? No. I'm just asking, do you believe that? Do you like wholeheartedly believe that school should not know what's happening at home with kids? Forget the discipline. You have involved, caring people that are aware of what's happening, and parents of majority of the kids that we deal with that are heavily gang involved, they have their own issues. So there's also looking beyond the child and saying, what's happening at home with mom and dad to say, man, how do we make your parents stronger? So let me tell you about this kid because it highlights the issue you're talking about. All right, so 1 of 5, he's very disruptive at home, completely uncontrollable. He's the only kid that this mom has this one's uncontrollable. All right, so every time he does something naughty, she gives him attention. Then he moves on to grade 1, he's failing school because he's extremely disruptive. He hasn't developed any social skills. He doesn't know how to integrate with other kids. He just continues to do the behavior that he does at home and school. What happens is teachers are frustrated, so he gets a teaching assistant, he gets pulled out to the side. And then at the age of 9, he's at home. This is a real kid, a real story. His mom tells him, look, you got too much energy, you got to get out of the house. And he goes out, and now he's on his own. And then he finds other kids. And I'll ask you here, are those kids like him or less like him? More like him or less like him? He's out on his own for the first time. So for the first time, this kid who's connected to nobody and nothing goes out, mom says, you got too much energy, go jump in. He finds another kid just like him. Another kid who at 3 is uncontrollable, was failing at the age of 6. At 9, his mom told him the same thing. You got too much energy, get out of here, kid. Go dump your energy and come back before the streetlights come on. So that's what this kid does. Goes out and he finds one kid, he's just like him. For the first time, this kid's like, oh my God, I found somebody like me. And then he moves on, he continues on, and what happens is kids do, quote unquote, what kids do. Now I'll tell you what happens at the age of 9, which is indicative all over the world. So we took this word from the United States, it's called delinquency. So 9-year-olds go to school, and a 9-year-old to another 9-year-old says to one of the kids, pushes them, takes their juice box, and he says, this is mine now. If you tell somebody, I'm going to punch you in the face. What do we call that when it's 2 9-years-old? It's called bullying. What is that called if you're over the age of 12? It's called robbery. Robbery. So we water down the activities that they're practicing at the age of 8 and 9. They're practicing it. We water it down. Some people say boys will be boys in this particular case. Oh, these are just kids. And it never gets addressed. They're showing you what they are going to do. This kid practiced what he was going to do into adulthood or into his teenage years. And then what happens is this kid hits his teenage years and he's out and about on his own trying to figure out the world with a whole bunch of other kids that are just like him. He's got all these risk factors, no mitigating factors. And then he gets arrested at the age of 15 for trafficking in cocaine, which is where myself and my partner end up getting involved with him. So we get involved with him, we talk to him, and at 15 he self-identifies as a gang member. We talk to his mom, we figure out the full story and every risk factor he had. The big indicators were there. And he just got passed along through because everybody who had that opportunity said it's somebody else's fault. It's somebody else's problem. They're going to deal with it. I don't have to deal with it. Just like when we talk about, schools don't discipline them and the police don't discipline them. That's somebody else's fault, right? Yeah, so somebody else's fault. Yes, sir. You're going to say something. Nobody said hit. We said discipline. Okay, hold on a second. before we get there, give me 1 second. This conversation and this disagreement is based on the assumption that we all define discipline as the same thing. We don't. So what one person might define discipline is not a universally accepted thing. I have a very different definition of discipline. I think when it comes down to behavior, who wants to be corrected in their behavior consistently? Would you rather be corrected or would you rather be coached? No. So here, wait, I gotta, hold on a second. Hold on. I want to bring a highlight to something, all right? I want to bring a big highlight to something. And this is what's going to level everybody back out again to something normal. What we have here is a lot of passion, a lot of frustration. Agreed? Well, just wait. No, just wait. I know what your thing is. I know what your thing is. I got it loud and clear, all right? I got it. What I'm going to tell you is, historically, this is the problem and this is why it's got out of control. We are arguing about the solution. Just think about that. We're arguing about how to fix this. And the argument is, I know better than you. What we've learned after 3 years of intensive work in the field is that there's value in everything. We just need to know when to apply the best piece of value to it. But in order to do that, we need to communicate. And who's we? It's everybody. We need to communicate towards the shared vision of, we do not want this kid to become this. Agreed? We're all on the same page. That's why you're all here, right? Is you're curious about it and we want success for our kids and for our children and the communities and the neighborhoods. So here, I'll break it down to you and then we're going to get to some nitty gritty stuff. I'll get past this kid, all right? Long story short, that kid we had, we could not, as police officers, motivate or influence him enough to stop doing what he was doing. All right, and the reality is, in some of the worst cases, this is where we get conflicted, and this is where a human thing. The story we tell you of a kid from the age of 0 to 18 that becomes a gang member is a sad story. It's a terrible story. It's heartbreaking. But I want you to imagine the line right here. And at the age of 18 or 15 and plus, these kids, if they go unchecked, they cross this line. And what happens when they cross the line? They kill people. They shoot people. They rob people. They manipulate young women into sex trafficking. So the motivation to want to stop that is to stop this from ever happening. And here's the twisted part to all that stuff. And this is where it becomes a unified and collected effort to say, okay, we need to value what each other's roles are in the solution. The solution, not the problem. So anything to do with the problem, and this is why, that's why, get that out of your head. That's in the past. That's yesterday. It's about today and tomorrow. It's always about today and tomorrow. So today and tomorrow, it's valuing what each other's role is and how do we support each other so that kid never crosses a line and victimizes a family. And victimizes an absolute innocent person where 2 weeks ago, a 15-year-old kid was shot and killed for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't care what anybody has to say about it. There's nothing you're going to tell me that's going to justify that. Nothing. So here's the value into it. Or we looked at what works and what doesn't work. So our gang prevention framework, we know what gangs are. We know what areas we need to be in right now. And we know what we should be looking out for. But then what do you do? Here's what you do. Evidence-based being, we looked at things that actually work. So you have a college or a university that comes in and says, we want to see if this program works. There's 3 big pillars in gang prevention. Number 1 is prevention. All right, so those are the risk factors, and this is where prevention lies. And when we talk about preventing things, especially these type of behaviors, if you want to prevent that violence, if you wait until this kid is 15, it's too late. It works between 0 to 9 because they're easily influenced. They're looking to be influenced. They're looking for guidance and direction. All of these studies and the research and the actual best practice says focus on prevention between the ages of 0 to 9. So part of this is identifying those kids at 0 to 9. What do we do to mitigate that? And that's not the role of the police. I have no child background. I don't know even how to do it. But we have teachers, we have social workers, we have community workers, we have youth outreach workers that might be better suited to deal with this. But we need to be able to identify collectively and look at how do we stop this kid from going down that pathway? What do we need to drop in? Who do we need to pat on the shoulder here? And who's the best to do it? Whether it be a community member, an educator, and how do we support that and value that to say 100% we're going to support this. Now after that, we have a second issue. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, but that comes down to education. That comes down to sharing what you know. Those parents, yourself, a lot of people didn't know any of this stuff. We didn't know it. until 3 years ago. And we've been doing this for over a decade. Jay's been doing it for 30 years. And until we had it listed out for us, then we're like, oh, this is what we should be looking for. So we know prevention 0 to 9. The next step, and this is absolutely crucial, is the intervention component. There are thousands of gang members that are in our legal justice system right now, in the age of 12 to 18. And we did a gap analysis, which is we looked at social services all over the city. We wanted to see where's the disconnect between a male or a female that's in the criminal justice system that might be gang involved and social services to mitigate these risks. And what we found out were a lot of different things, but one of the highlights were if you're an 18-year-old male and you're coming out of jail, there's nothing for you. You're absolutely on your own. That's all over the city, and that's a problem. So for us to really attack this problem, not only do we need to prevent 0 to 9, but at the same time, we need to aggressively conduct outreach and intervene with those that are already in the criminal justice system. Reason being is if you're a gang member, you have a statistically higher chance to reoffend. You're also the one recruiting 8 and 9-year-old kids into gangs. So we can't just focus on 0 to 9. We got to focus on those that are already involved in there. And that might be jails, it might be psychologists, social workers, job placement agencies, mental health, CAS, faith-based agencies, wherever we can connect this kid or young person to.
But the thing is if they get in jail at 18, well, they come out of CAS at 18 and there's nothing there for them.
1,000,000%.
I was there on the
Million percent. But we can't just accept that. This is about change. Right? This is about change. And to say, we know these are the issues. How do we stop this? And I'll tell you, the police, we can't fix that either. But this is where the police lie. 15 and up. Serious community violence. Look, there was a study done of a gang in Los Angeles. All right, so this gang in Los Angeles, 300 gang members. They did a study, and what they realized was that 90% of the gang members had an average gang membership of 2 to 3 years, and they all left on their own. The other remaining 10%, or 30 gang members, were responsible for 100% of the criminal decision making. They were gang members for life. They were the ones that were killing people, shooting people, recruiting young kids, trafficking underage women, dealing in drugs. That was the 10%. The other 90%, they were in here for a short period of time and they left for their own reasons. We canvassed internally in the Toronto Police Service to every major investigator that we know, and we said, would you agree with this number in Toronto? And they all agreed yes. About 10% of the total gangs that we're dealing with are responsible for all of the violence. And the number one way, this is not even debatable, to combat gang violence is for police to arrest people. That's where we lay. Yes, ma'am. So I don't know what the money is used for exactly. I don't know, that's a way above my skill. But the idea is investing in the right strategies, this being one of them, to get a collective effort. There's a reason why we have integrated gang prevention task force. Integrated means integrating every organization that's impacted into a common vision, to have some level of communication so we can all understand and value each other's impacts, but it has to be driven by the community. Because guess what? Gangs are a sandwich. The bottom piece of bread is the families that they come from. The middle ingredients are schools, communities, community housing, the city itself. You have local businesses, local shops, victims of gang crime, schools. You have every impacted group, jails, legal justice system, and the very top piece of bread is police. There's nothing after police. There's nothing after us and there's nothing before families. That's it. Everybody else in the middle has a bit of a buffer room to say, look, I can do what I can do and it's going to move on to something else. So these type of initiatives and why the police were leading the conversation with the community is to say, there's nothing before you, there's nothing after us. So if anybody has to drive the importance of coming to solutions, it's going to be us, being the police of the community. And then we got to incorporate places like schools, jails, corrections, housing. We got to bring everybody together and say, look, we have to push this in there. But all across the world, the role of the police in this is to find those people that are committing horrible acts and hold them accountable for what they do. The reality is about 10% of the gang population will only thrive while they're incarcerated, meaning that they have 3 meals in a bed, meaning that for the first time in their life they have structure. Then we can effectively figure out through the work of psychologists and psychiatrists what's going on here and how do we intervene. That has to be done by professionals in that field. Our job as police is to drive this initiative with the community, step back to our role so we're not invading anybody else's space, and then empower those in those spaces that are most effective to say, look, this is your space, what can we do to support you? And then bring in all the other groups to say, hey, how can we support you right now for this particular individual? And this needs to happen throughout the entire operation. And we talked about this. Now that kid I'm telling you about, let's just talk about a kid 0 to 18 that becomes a gang member. How many organizations or people group does that person hit? A ton of them. All right, now we have a gold model standard in the United States that says if you want to attack this problem, you need to bring together a massive amount of people. And those people are from these groups. You got schools, local service providers being not-for-profits, faith-based organizations, whatever you need, it's all included in the service. Law enforcement, criminal justice entities being the courts and prosecutions, municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. Everybody needs to be on the same page, right? Because think about it, we talked about the word discipline and what that means. But we need to have kind of a common language to know that when we say at risk, what does that mean? So we know what we're looking at collectively. We all agree that this is what that means. And once we can all agree on a term of language, we can know what we're dealing with. So that no matter what you're calling or who you're talking to, when we say words, they mean the same things to us because words can mean different things. And words absolutely matter.